I'm going to share with you something I've been working on about how to bring the Free Will Baptist denomination to an end in 7 easy steps. It's a little bit of an exercise in satire, so I hope you will bear with me and understand that I'm doing satire here. I don't really want to bring the Free Will Baptist denomination to an end in any number of steps, whether easy or difficult. But we've heard some great things at this conference, and what a wonderful thing we've had with the first message challenging us to hold fast to biblical faith and practice. And really, that's kind of why we're here. We really believe that what we confess as Free Will Baptists is apostolic faith and practice. It is the faith and practice of Christ and His apostles. Otherwise, why are we doing all this, right? And why should we have a denomination if we don't believe it? Why fracture the body of Christ over just differences of opinion on little things? We think that the faith and practice of the Free Will Baptist Church is biblical. It's New Testament. And so that's why we're doing all this. That's why we're going to this trouble. And that's what Brother Glenn reminded us of. We have to hold fast to the tradition that has been handed down to us from the apostles, through the saints and martyrs of the Christian past, all the way through the Free Will Baptist to the present. And then we were reminded of the importance of maintaining associationalism, maintaining our togetherness and our polity, which is so important in this age of separatism, in this age of independency and non-denominationalism. And then we were reminded of the importance of the church, not as just a destination or a attractional model of church, but church as, what did he say, a direction. It's about the trajectory, the kingdom trajectory that Christ has us on. It's about mission, not just about the church as an attractional destination. And then last night we heard a challenging message from Dr. Crow about the heritage in our history. What the saints and martyrs, the Free Will Baptist saints and martyrs of the Christian past have given to us as a legacy. And that it is our job to take what we have received, to take that bequest, and to leave it to our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren intact. We can drop the ball and forget it and squander it, or we can be a steward of it and hand it down. So now what I'm asked to do is talk about protecting our future, and I'm going to kind of flip this on its head and do a satire about how to bring the Free Will Baptist denomination to an end in 7 easy steps. And I don't want to do this, but I'm convinced that if you want to do this, what I'm going to talk about is the way to do it. And I'm concerned that we are all, myself included, tempted to be intimidated by the spirit of the age. We're tempted to panic and to do things like what I'm going to talk about in this particular talk. Brothers and sisters, we're all in this together. And we have to think and pray hard about how to overcome this temptation we all face, and to which we've all succumbed at times, this sense of intimidation and panic, at least me. And by the way, it's not just us. We're not the only ones who are facing this. We're sharing this temptation with faithful Christians in other denominations. And also, I want to say that I'm only attempting to answer one question in this talk. We could do other discussions and talks about ways to strengthen our denomination, how best to conserve our heritage of doctrine and practice, how best to worship faithfully, or to foster growth in our churches. But this talk is about one thing and one thing only: the quickest way to bring the Free Will Baptist denomination to an end. So step one is, if you want to bring the Free Will Baptist denomination to an end, is get the answers wrong. Jump to conclusions. Get the answers wrong. Jump to conclusions about why people are leaving the church. Jump to conclusions about why people, especially young people, leave or don't attend church. And then extrapolate those conclusions to why some Free Will Baptist churches are dying, or why we have a shortage of ministers. Be sure to assume that the reasons young people are leaving Christianity the reasons why we have the rise of the nones, N-O-N-E-S, young people who are saying no religious preference. Assume that these reasons are stylistic or cultural. Do everything you can to make the teaching, ministry, worship, music, and youth ministry of the church look as much like secular pop culture as possible, since it seems obvious that the lack of these features is why young people are leaving the church. Continue to believe that myth. Rely on anecdotal data. Miss out on all the credible sociological research conducted by scholars like Christian Smith, Melinda Lundquist-Denton, Kenda Creasy-Dean, and others, as well as credible studies by people like Tom Rayner at Lifeway, Ken Ham at Answers in Genesis, George Barna and David Kinnaman, and all these others. And all these studies show over and over again that young people are leaving all sorts of churches of all cultural and stylistic types at the same rate. Traditional to contemporary, rural to urban, liturgical to charismatic, small to mega. Ignore this data. Misunderstand the actual reasons these researchers say young people are leaving the church. And the actual reasons they say that young people are leaving the church are the extreme segmenting of churches according to age, generation, and cultural preferences. The results of lack of intergenerational relationships and mentoring, shallowness in the pulpit and Sunday school, the lack of depth, substance, and honest answers to tough intellectual questions. Ignore this. Fail to engage with studies like that of Barna that say that 2/3 of millennials prefer to worship in a traditional worship space and prefer the word classic to trendy to describe their religious experience. Continue to rely on the answers from the 1990s non-denominational megachurch movement that failed to produce lasting results in changed lives, growth in holiness, and a well-developed Christian worldview among evangelicals. So, basically, get the answers wrong. Step 2, lose your nerve. Allow the mistaken assumptions about young people leaving the church, as well as the swift cultural changes in our secularizing society and the current resistant mission field, to throw you into a panic. As a result of this panic, let me see if I can get my computer to work here. As a result of this panic, throw various cultural... Don't laugh, Anna. She's laughing at my tablet here. Isn't that sad when your daughter laughs at your technological choices? So as a result of this secularization that's going on in the current resistant mission field, get into a frenzied panic. And as a result of this panic, throw various cultural solutions at the problem of how to grow your church in hopes that something will stick, something will work. Lose the courage of your convictions when it comes to the strong beliefs and practices that your Free Will Baptist forefathers and foremothers taught you were biblically and theologically true and important. Lose your nerve. Panic. That's step 2. Step 3 is become a wannabe. Long to be somebody else. That's very important here. Are you taking notes? Become a wannabe. Long to be somebody else. Allow the fear and courage of step 2, the fear and lack of courage in step 2, which is panic, to create in you a profound lack of confidence in who you are as a Free Will Baptist. This lack of confidence will compel you to a wannabe mentality, in which you want to be like others in evangelicalism who currently seem successful in the cultural subgroup that you place a plus value on. Fill in the blank. I don't know what you place a plus value on, but fill in the blank. Non-denominational, independent Baptist, Southern Baptist, young, restless, and reformed, charismatic, quasi-charismatic, seeker-sensitive. You fill in the blank. But if you place a plus value on this, that's what you need to push. You need to want to be this with all your might. But you must make sure that the people you want to be like are all celebrities with extremely large, successful churches. Begin to imitate these individuals and ministries and movements carefully, therefore downplaying the distinctives of your Free Will Baptist doctrine, practice, and tradition. So if you want to destroy the Free Will Baptist denomination, you must become a wannabe. You must long to be someone else. And then step 4, very important step here, emphasize style over substance. You've got to emphasize style over substance. In keeping with 1 and 2 above, emphasize style over substance every time. You have to be intentional about this. Cling to the idea that if we engage in cultural tweaking and adaptation to cultural preferences that various subgroups of the population like in their day-to-day lives, we'll have obtained the silver bullet that will finally give us church growth. It'll give us a breakthrough. There's a silver bullet out there, and it's always going to be cultural preference. Fail to understand that making church over into a cultural experience, and by that, I mean classical music concert, rock concert, hoedown, you name it. But fail to understand that making the church over into a cultural experience, especially in our increasingly diverse neighborhoods, will further divide the body of Christ into special interest groups based on generation or cultural preference, not the gospel and the word. So in short, you've got to strongly de-emphasize substance. And this is going to include especially de-emphasizing doctrine. You're never going to be able to do this and be successful at this unless you de-emphasize doctrine. De-emphasize doctrine. I mean, we all know that doctrine divides. Downplay your Free Will Baptist doctrine. Downplay your Free Will Baptist practice. Downplay your Free Will Baptist distinctives. Downplay your Free Will Baptist tradition as much as possible. Now let me give you some tips on how to do this, like when you're preaching or teaching. When you come to a passage in your preaching or Sunday school class in the Bible that strongly teaches Free Will Baptist doctrine, let's say on the possibility of apostasy, or the necessity of immersion for church membership, or the washing of the saints' feet, or speaking in tongues. When you come to one of these passages in your preaching or Sunday school teaching, you must choose between one of 2 options. Now, option 1 that I'm going to give you here is the most successful one. And it's this. You just preach and teach the passage in such a way that a non-denominational or interdenominational audience could all agree with it. Now, option 2 is not as preferable, but it'll work okay. And it's simply touch very briefly on the distinctive Free Will Baptist teaching, and then move on to the next point quickly. So you can do that. If you're in a church where that's what you need to do that. But option 1 is better. Just do it to where if it's a non-denominational or interdenominational audience, nobody will disagree with what you're saying. That's really the preferred option. Never ever forget that to spend time preaching and teaching Free Will Baptist doctrine and practice will make people from other denominations whom you hope to get as transfer members uncomfortable. And it will cause them not to transfer their membership to your church. This will obviously hamper church growth. So you cannot emphasize Free Will Baptist doctrine or Free Will Baptist practice. Okay, now step 5, guys and gals, is never ever take the long view. Always emphasize short-term results. Never ever take the long view. Always emphasize the here and the now. And this means using methods that bring the quickest possible results, even if those methods have never been tried before in the history of Christianity. Even if you don't have the slightest idea what the unintended consequences are going to be. Don't buy into the idea, the old tired idea, that long-range growth in the number of true disciples comes from church health. Don't buy into that. Don't buy into the idea that long-range growth comes from building your church on the sufficiency of Scripture and the ordinary means of grace in the New Testament. Instead, that's too much of a long view. You need to place emphasis and place a premium on instant results. You want the quickest results you can possibly do. So what you want to do is play up unique examples of celebrity pastors in your town or online who've experienced amazing fast growth in their megachurches, and then seek to adapt your local church here in Virginia to be as much like them as possible. Now, let me just do a little excursus here and give you an illustration about this long-term view as opposed to short-term view in the political world. So let's use political success as an example, if you will indulge me here. The importance here is to see church success as more like success in electoral politics than in success at changing people's minds politically. So it's all about the vote at that moment, that election. That's what church growth should be like if you want to kill the fruit of denomination and kill evangelicalism. See church success as more like success in electoral politics. So in this, a political candidate has just the right advisors, just the right amount of money and the right kind of marketing, and he wins an election. But he doesn't really make any long-term gains for his political party or his political principles. He wins the election. And the next time he spends the money and is smart, wins another election. But there are no long-term gains in getting more people to go with his principles. You want to avoid the approach of the conservative legal movement. Now, y'all been watching some of this stuff with, Gorsuch and what's his name, Kavanaugh. You want to avoid that approach, the approach of the conservative legal movement. You remember after Judge Robert Bork was kept off the Supreme Court 30 years ago? The conservative legal education movement launched a long-term strategy. What they said is we need to articulate a conservative legal and judicial philosophy that just goes completely against the grain of modern legal thinking. We want to train people in that philosophy. We want to spend money on education and scholarships. We want to mentor and train youth in that philosophy so that in the next generation there'll be a whole lot more young people that don't go with sort of the cool modern legal philosophy, but go with an old, crusty, old-fashioned legal philosophy that the Founding Fathers espoused. And if we really commit ourselves to this, maybe we'll have an army of young conservative legal scholars that can be Supreme Court justices in the next generation in 30 years. And so that's what they did, and that's where you got people like Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. You resolutely don't want to do this sort of thing. You want it to be more like electoral politics. You spend the money, you get the election, you get short-term results. You don't have 30 years to wait. People get bored. It's okay to laugh, by the way. It's like President Pinson saying all this. People get bored if you don't give them quicker, bigger results. You don't have 30 years. You're going to be retired in 30 years. You want results now. You don't have the luxury of playing the long game. And you can't guarantee how it'll turn out. So don't ever play the long game. Always go for the quickest short-term results that you can. And then step 6 is emphasize the attractional over the missional. It's kind of like what the gentleman was talking about the other day when he said directional as opposed to destinational. Emphasize the attractional over the missional. If you want to achieve big short-term results, you're going to have to emphasize the attractional in your church. Attracting people based on cultural considerations. This means you've got to engage in consumerism, 2 things, consumerism and segmented marketing. You try to attract people to the church like a marketer attracts customers to a product. This will involve, of necessity, segmented marketing. Now, let me explain. You're going to have to segment your market according to generation and cultural tastes and preferences. This is rule number one for getting the customer to buy. This means you need to do everything you can to divide the young from the old. And, if you look at standard marketing research, it shows that customers will not buy things as readily if they don't appeal to their generation, or to their taste group, or to their customer preferences, their consumer preferences. So what you've got to do is acknowledge that the customer is always right. You see, what applies in the consumer realm and in retail also applies in church. The customer is always right. Whether they're regenerate or not, they're right. And customers today want to be entertained. This is the biggest and most important thing. This means making worship as entertaining and cool and edgy as possible. Because, guys, if you lose your attractional edge, you will lose members to churches, to other evangelical churches, with more and better entertainment. You don't want to lose members to other evangelical churches. Do not fall for the approach that simply being the church with excellence in vibrant personal evangelism, disciplined prayer, expositional preaching, helping hurting people, and engaging in teaching, long-range discipleship, and leadership development. Do not think that that is the recipe for ultimate healthy, long-term growth. You must realize that the customer is always right. Now, step 7 is the last step here. Try really hard to forget. Now, this should probably be step 1. I think this is the most important step that we've got to get cemented in our mind if we want to bring the Free Will Baptist Denomination to an end. Try really hard to forget. It's the most essential step. Try really, really hard to forget. Now, what this is going to mean is carefully attempting to foster in yourself and those around you a systematic amnesia about the Christian tradition and the Free Will Baptist tradition. You want to carefully cultivate and foster amnesia about the saints and martyrs who have gone before you in the faith. Now this, I can't stress this enough. This is especially important when it's regarding the Free Will Baptist tradition. In every area of church life, you are going to have to emphasize discontinuity with the past. If you want to do this, you cannot emphasize continuity with the Christian past or the Free Will Baptist past. You've got to have a stark discontinuity with our religious past. So what this means is you're going to have to engage in revolutionary leadership. You have to have a revolutionary mind. This means you throw out all the things from the past and you start from scratch with pop culture and demographic studies in one hand and a Bible in the other. Do not be tempted to adopt a reformational model. You've got to adopt a revolutionary model. Now see, the reformational model is where you reach back and you retrieve the riches of the Christian faith and the Free Will Baptist faith and practice that have been eclipsed. You try to renew and bring fresh life to the church by reaching back into the past and maybe some things that have been eclipsed in your recent church history. You don't want to do that. That's the reformational model. You want to engage in revolutionary leadership. Do not look back to vibrant Christian Reformation and missions movements from the past that emphasize the sufficiency of Scripture for the life and ministry of the church. And what you especially don't want to do is to look back at the Free Will Baptist movement. Now, I've got a few key points here you may want to write down. When you prepare for sermons, never read commentaries written before your lifetime. Seriously. You'll never be able to pull this off if you go reading commentaries that were written before you were born. This is maybe even more important. Never sing songs. See, she's offended. Never sing songs that were written before your lifetime. I'm serious. That's the biggest way to keep the Free Welch Denomination alive and the Christian tradition alive. To sing songs that were written before you were born. Don't do this. Only sing songs that were written in the last few years. Oh, and by the way, only read how-to books. Don't read books with substance, especially not books about theology. You know. Read how-to books. Make sure they're always paperback and short. Never read books from the Christian past about how, especially don't read books from the Christian past about how to do church. I hate to say this, but we had a speaker yesterday who said you need to go read The Reformed Pastor by Richard Baxter. That was written in the 1600s, Brother Glenn. The Reformed Pastor? Never read books. I hate to disagree with a former speaker, but never read books from the Christian past about how to do church. Resolutely only read books on church and ministry by living authors. Now, when it comes to doctrine, especially the distinctive doctrines of your Free Will Baptist confessional heritage, don't read books. Only read blogs. But don't read fwbtheology.com. Don't read that blog, because it's got a little bit too much about Free Will Baptist doctrine and heritage. Only read blogs. And if you must read books, don't read books about or by people who lived before you were born. I cannot emphasize this enough. You know, you hear some of these guys talking about Spurgeon and Spurgeon. I mean, come on. Do not read books that were written before you were born. So the bottom line here is, in short, initiate a strong, clear break with the past in all your church practices, both with the immediate past and with the distant past. A strong, clear break is the only thing that will do it. You've got to cultivate, intentionally, carefully, cultivate amnesia. Be an intentional presentist. Live in the present. And never ever fall for the old line that only by conserving the riches of the heritage that has been bequeathed to you will you have anything to hand on to your children and their children and their children's children. Make a stark, clear break with the past. Eliminate any continuity of the past. Complete discontinuity with the Christian past and the Free Will Baptist past is the only way to do it. So let's review the 7 easy steps for bringing the Free Will Baptist denomination to an end. Number 1, get the answers wrong about why young people are leaving the church. Step number 2, lose your nerve. Step number 3, become a wannabe. Long to be somebody else. Step 4, emphasize style over substance. Step 5, never ever take the long view. Always emphasize short-term results. Step 6, emphasize the attractional over the missional. And step 7, the most important of all, try really, really hard to forget. Okay, now that's the little lesson. Now for questions. Okay, Warner, do we have, okay, we got a guy that's going to go around with a roving mic. And now, at the end of our little seminar here, you can ask questions or make comments or whatever. We've got 2 mics here. So let's have questions. Time for questions. I think we've got about 10 minutes. He said to go an hour after we gather here. So that gives us about 10 more minutes to hang out a little bit. Let's get some conversation going here. Well, what can I clarify for you? I know I've said nothing that's controversial here, but still. Yeah. Michael.
So, what is the marriage point between reaching this generation and looking back at past generations? So, cultural relevancy and historical preservation. What's the marriage point of that?
Okay, so I'm going to get out of character and just be mad here, okay? I'm going to answer you as what I want to. So basically, what we have to do is realize that the Christian church, when it was founded by the apostles, is this on? Okay, so I'm going to go with it. Here. Okay, great. The Christian church, when it was founded by the apostles, was founded explicitly and carefully as a countercultural community. In other words, culturally, it went against all the norms of Greco-Roman culture. I mean, when you walked past, Sundays weren't the Sabbath day, they weren't Sundays like they are now. When you went to your local house church in, first century Ephesus to go to church, in the first century, you're in the midst of the sexualized, body-pierced, tattooed, crazy, pagan, intellectual culture.
Sounds like America.
Yeah, urban, very urban. So you're walking past all manner of entertainment, spine-tingling entertainment. Everybody's got their favorite gladiator. You're walking past the Colosseum, past the bath, past the greatest dramas and tragedies and comedies that you could ever imagine, the greatest pantomimes, all manner of entertainment, and you go into this little simple house church, and your worship is so word-oriented that the Greco-Roman mystery religions who are commenting on Christian worship say, they're just like those Jews in those synagogues. That's not even a religion. That's a philosophical organization. All they sit around is talk. The guy gets up and talks for 45 minutes about these memoirs of the apostles and prophets. He just talk. And they have these long prayers. And when they sing these long songs that communicate all this philosophy. So that's what Pliny and the other early Greco-Roman critics of Christianity said. These Christians, they're just like the Jews in their synagogues. It's all talk. It's not spine-tingling. It's not exciting. It's not like the Greco-Roman mystery religions, beautiful and colorful and festive. It's just talk. Now, I will say they get out and they help the poor, buddy. They get out and they bind the wounds. They get out in the community and they lead in ethical leadership. But in those services, it's just, we got all this great stuff going on out here, all this great entertainment, and they go in there and sit around and talk and wash feet. They're cannibals. That's what they said they were. They were cannibals. They eat the blood, and they say they're eating the blood and drinking the blood and eating the flesh of this guy that is supposed to have died and rose again. Very countercultural. Christianity has always been very countercultural when you look at when it went into the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and the Vikings, and when St. Patrick went into the Irish to convert the Irish, when William Carey went to India, and Judson and all of the great missionaries. When Christianity goes into cultures, its religion and its worldview is always starkly countercultural, as C.S. Lewis often said. But we shouldn't be surprised when that occurs, because that's the way the apostles were. Hello? We shouldn't be surprised because that's the way the apostles were. That's the way it always was in the New Testament. It was countercultural.
She's creepy.
Give me another mic. And this is a brand new sound system too. Huh? Okay. Is it doing? Is it on? Okay. It is on? Okay. So then the question is, okay, how do you be culturally relevant? Well, this is cultural relevance. You are culturally relevant because you're dealing with people and their culture. So in this culture, you're going to have air conditioning. You're going to have sound systems. You're going to choose to do things like that will help people understand. But what you're not trying to do is to appeal to people's secular cultural preferences. Part of the problem with that is when you do that, you're going to balkanize your church. How many of y'all went to a public high school? You remember what that was like? Have you been recently? You got your hip-hop people and your goths and your jocks and your preps and your people who like country music and your people... you got 6 or 7 different cultural groups based on their taste. if you emphasize cultural preferences, you will always balkanize your church into different special interest groups. What the apostles did is they brought people in a Mediterranean culture from all sorts of different cultures into their churches, and they had what Tom Rainer calls simple church. So they de-emphasized as much as possible the cultural elements so they could bring as many people from as many different ethnic and cultural groups and racial groups into the church to be as one. That's what the apostles did. So cultural relevance was never about ethnic and cultural and taste and trying to make your church to where people like it, like what they listen to on the radio or the kind of food they eat. And, well, I like to go to Cracker Barrel, well, I like to eat sushi. It was never that way. The apostles were never that way. That would be death to the kind of one church bringing all the cultures and all the age groups and all the civilizations and all the racial groups together to make them one in Jesus. If you emphasize culture too much, and I mean whether it's just hoedown country culture, or whether it's rock and roll culture, or hip-hop culture, or opera culture, or whatever it is, if you emphasize culture too much in the church to try to be relevant to that group, well, you'll only be relevant to one group, won't you? Or you'll have to divide your church of 200 into churches of about 30. 7 churches of 30. So that you can give, so that you can contextualize the gospel to that direct cultural taste. So cultural relevance is about letting people know that you understand where they're coming from. Having air conditioning, having a nice building to meet in our particular culture. This kind of stuff. Having a nice website. Having a nice presence on social media. Using things that show excellence. But it cannot be cultural preference. It cannot be. Because you can't, a lot of us are in suburbs where there's an Indian guy with a PhD, and there's a poor black person, and there's an old country boy with a big old belt buckle. You can't have a church with those 3 guys in it if you're going to appeal into one of their culture. So the big issue is what cultural relevance cannot be according to the apostles and the New Testament. So when we get that straight, and we try to make our churches as universal and simple and biblical as possible, then we get away from all that cultural slicing and dicing and dividing people up, and we make people all one in Jesus, the one holy, universal, and apostolic church. I've got a few more minutes here.
So you mentioned...
Let's get you on a microphone.
So you mentioned losing nerve. Today we preach to a lot of people that have never had any kind of nerve or courage. How do we build that with them?
Yeah, I think, to use a secular analogy, I think you have to do what you would do in any other situation. When you're in the Democratic Party, or when you're in the LGBT movement, you just can't afford to be mealy-mouthed about what you believe. So what you got to do is you got to love people, and you got to help people. You got to get relationships going with people. But you can't be mealy-mouthed about what you believe. You can't, be very careful at first, because they're going to know what you believe. So, whether you're in the Democratic Party, or the gay lesbian movement, or whether you're in the Sierra Club radical environmentalist movement, or whether you're in the John Birch Society and the ultra-right wing of the alt-right of the Republican Party, or whether you're an evangelical Christian or a Free Will Baptist, you're going to have to kind of put your cards on the table. Right? You're going to let them know where you're coming from, about the fact that they're going to hell, and the fact that their sin is going to condemn them to eternal hell. That God is completely other than us, and we will never measure up to His standards. And so we're going to be separated from Him and under His wrath forever. And we also got to tell them that they can reject Christ and be lost forever without any chance of repentance. That Hebrews 6:4-6 thing. We got to tell them that. Now, when I pastored back in Georgia, we had a lot of Southern Baptists that would come here because our church was growing. It was on fire. Things were happening. We were building. It was exciting. And so lots of Southern Baptists wanted to transfer over to my church. Well, it would have been very easy for me to say, well, you know, if I start talking about this stuff about losing your salvation, I'm going to lose them. And who wants to lose members, right? But you just got to be loving and kind. You got to help the poor. You got to bind up wounds. You got to find ways to counsel people and forge relationships with people. Get the mentality in that community that this church stands for helping the poor and marginalized and being the best binder up of wounds that we know of in this whole community. And yet, you know, they have some pretty weird beliefs over at that church. They talk about things like hell. They even think if you lose, that you can lose your salvation and never get it back. How weird is that? When you live in a Baptistic, non-denominational, once saved, always saved, Bible Belt culture, like we all do. So what you have to do is you have to put all your cards on the table, and you have to teach people. Just like you would if you were a Democrat, just like you would if you were in any successful cultural movement. You have to teach people the basic principles of your thought on things, and what you think is going to change the world, and what you think is of ultimate value and significance. But you must do so in a context of love and relationships and compassion. And I think when you do that, whether you're a Christian or whether you're a member of the local atheist club, that's the only way to get people to buy into what you're doing for the long term, but also be attracted to what's going on.